For 30 days, every healer in the kingdom had tried to wake the Alpha King. His heart still beat, slow, distant, like a drum heard through deep water, but his eyes never opened. Until Jessa's 7-year-old twins wandered into the most heavily guarded room in the realm, did something no one could explain, and the king's eyes flew open for the first time. What no one expected, least of all Jessa, was that his first word would be her name, and by the time she understood what her children had done, it would be too late to run. The job was supposed to be simple. Jessa pressed her back against the cold corridor wall and counted her breaths the way her mother had taught her. 4 in, 7 out, steady as a river. She was supposed to be delivering broth to the night healers. She was supposed to be back in the kitchens in 10 minutes, and she was supposed to know exactly where her children were. She was 0 for 3. She'd brought them tonight because the woman who usually watched them had a fever, and it was either bring them or lose the shift, and she could not afford to lose the shift. They'd been perfect through the long walk from the lower city, perfect through the palace gates. She'd stationed them on a bench outside the east wing with a bread roll each, and what she had believed, foolishly, apparently, was a clear and direct command. Do not move. She'd been gone 12 minutes. Now the door to the king's outer chamber was cracked open. That door was never open. She'd heard the guards say so herself, had watched them check the iron bolt twice on every shift change with the grim ritual of men who understood what it meant to fail at the one thing they were given to protect. Jessa set the tray down on the hallway bench. Her pulse climbed. She should leave. She should find a guard. She should do anything except walk toward that open door on silent feet, heart hammering, because she could hear her son's voice on the other side of it. Mama said, "Wait here, Rumi," Finn's voice, hushed and solemn, the tone he used when he was being extremely responsible. She said, "Don't touch anything." "I'm not touching anything," Rumi's voice. "I'm just looking." Looking is almost touching. It is not. It's the start of touching. Jessa pushed the door open. The king's chamber was vast and dimly lit, candles burning low in their sconces, the shadows pooling in the corners. The bed dominated the far wall, enormous, curtained in deep blue, and there, impossibly, were her children. Finn stood at the foot of it with his arms crossed, and the expression he wore when he was trying hard to be in charge of a situation that had already escaped him. Rumi had climbed onto the footstool beside the bed and was studying the king's face with the focused, unblinking attention she usually reserved for injured creatures and locked boxes. "Finn? Rumi?" Jessa hissed quietly. They both turned. Finn's face cycled rapidly through innocent, then guilty. Rumi simply looked at her with those calm, amber eyes and said, "His mouth is sad, Mama. Even when he's sleeping. We need to leave. Right now." "He smells like the forest," Rumi continued, unmoved. "Rumi..." "I told her not to sniff him," Finn said, and with the conviction of someone establishing a clear alibi. She said, "Smelling isn't touching, which I think is wrong, but..." The king's fingers moved. All 3 of them went still. Jessa's breath caught in her throat as she watched those long, scarred fingers curl slowly against the coverlet. Then his chest rose, a deeper breath than the shallow ones she'd seen the healers monitoring for weeks. His head turned slightly on the pillow, and his eyes opened. They were forest green, deep and wild, the color of moss in shadow. They were unfocused at first, scanning the ceiling. Then they found Rumi, still perched on the footstool, still staring at him with that unblinking curiosity. The king's lips moved. His voice came out wrecked, barely more than a rasp. "Jessa." Jessa's heart stopped. Even her twins went still. That's when the door crashed open behind them. Guards flooded in, boots thundering on stone. The head healer, Maris, a silver-haired woman, took the king's pulse with fingers that trembled visibly. Someone shouted for water. Someone else shouted for the royal advisor. Jessa grabbed Rumi off the footstool and hauled Finn against her side. her mind racing through explanations, excuses, anything that would make them invisible again. But the king's eyes had found her across the chaos. His eyes, sharp now, fixed on her with a recognition that made no sense. "Your Majesty." Maris leaned over him, blocking his view. "Can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" "The palace," he said, voice still rough but gaining strength. "I'm in the palace." His gaze slid past Maris, searching. "Where is she?" "Who, my lord?" "The woman with the children." Maris turned, but following his line of sight to where Jessa stood frozen against the far wall, twins pressed against her like small shields. "That's one of the servants, Your Majesty. She brought her children with her tonight. I believe they wandered in. What's your name?" The king's attention hadn't wavered from Jessa's face. She swallowed. Every instinct urged her to lie, but there were too many people here who knew her, who'd worked alongside her for 2 years. "Jessa, Your Majesty." Something passed across his face, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. He tried to sit up, but Maris pushed him gently back down. "You need to rest, my lord. You've been unconscious for 30 days. Your body, I know how long it's been." His voice had an edge now, the tone of someone used to being obeyed. His eyes were still on Jessa. "I need to speak with her." The door opened again. This time, the man who entered moved with the careful authority of someone who'd been holding a kingdom together by sheer will alone. Torian Greymark, the king's royal advisor, was tall and lean, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene with a single sweep, and his face shifted from shock to relief. "Jackson, thank the gods." "Torian." The king's voice softened slightly. "How bad is it?" Torian moved to the bedside, and Jessa watched the two men exchange a look that held years of trust. "The kingdom has held. Your brother kept things running. Kyle hates running things, which is why he'll be relieved to return them to you." Torian's gaze slid to Jessa, assessing. "I hear these children woke you. Is that true?" Jackson's eyes found the twins again. Finn had gone very still, arms wrapped tight around Jessa's waist, peeking out at the chaos with wide, worried eyes. Rumi was studying Torian with that same focused attention she'd given the sleeping king. "I don't know what they did," Jackson said carefully. "But yes, I felt them. I'd like to speak with their mother, privately." Healer Maris opened her mouth to protest, but Torian raised a hand. "Of course, Your Majesty. Though perhaps not tonight. You need rest, and I imagine this young woman needs to settle her children." He turned to Jessa with a smile. "Where do you work in the palace?" "The kitchens, my lord. I deliver to the night healers sometimes." The lie came easily, built from 2 years of practice. Terrified mother, wandering children. "Well, it seems your children have done what our best healers could not." Torian's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. "We're in your debt. Please, accept quarters in the palace for the next few days, for observation and protection. Given what the children did, it seems only prudent." "That's very kind, my lord, but we have lodgings in the lower city. I insist. His Majesty will want to thank you properly once he's recovered, and our healers should examine the children, make sure they weren't harmed." Jessa's stomach dropped. Her mind went white with panic, but she forced her face into something grateful and overwhelmed. "Of course, my lord. Thank you. Excellent. I'll have someone show you to your rooms." Jackson's eyes were still on Jessa as she was ushered out, at twins in tow. She felt the weight of that gaze all the way down the corridor. The quarters they were given were nicer than anywhere Jessa had lived in 7 years. Finn cataloged everything immediately, his voice rising with each new discovery. "Mama, the wardrobe has 3 whole drawers." 3, and they all work. He pulled each one open and closed to demonstrate. And look, the wash basin has soap. The fancy kind that smells like flowers, not the scratchy kind. Rumi went straight to the window and pressed her nose against the glass. Can we stay here forever? No, Jessa said, more sharply than she meant to. She was checking the door, the lock, the hinges. No bolt on the inside, she noticed with mounting dread. We're guests. That is all. I like it here. Rumi traced a finger through the condensation on the glass. It smells safe. Jessa's throat closed. She knelt down, pulled both children close. Listen to me, both of you. This is very important. Finn's expression went solemn. Rumi turned from the window. We're going to stay here for a few days, because the nice man said so, and we don't want to be rude. But you cannot use your powers, not even a little, not even if you're scared or upset. Do you understand? Why? Rumi asked. Because people don't understand it, and when people don't understand something, they get scared, and scared people do dangerous things. But we helped the king, Finn said quietly. Didn't we? We woke him up. I don't know what you did, sweetheart. And that's what scares me. She pulled the vial from her pocket, the last dose of suppressant her mother had given her 7 years ago. The liquid inside was nearly gone, but barely enough to coat the bottom. She'd been rationing it for months, giving them drops when their powers started to surface in dreams or tantrums. But this was different. This was the palace, full of healers who might actually recognize what the twins were. She gave them each half. Watched them grimace at the bitter taste. Watched their eyes go slightly glassy as the dose settled back down beneath their skin, quiet and hidden. Now sleep, she said. Both of you. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to leave. But Finn caught her hand as she stood. Mama? Yes, love? How did the king know your name? Jessa's chest tightened. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the same gesture her mother used to use on her. I don't know, Finn. But she was lying, and she thought maybe he knew it. Because as she settled the twins into the large bed and watched them drift off, she was thinking about the dreams she'd been having for weeks. A man with forest green eyes calling her name in the dark. A pull she'd been dismissing as exhaustion and stress, and the madness of a woman raising children alone in a city that didn't want her. A pull that felt, God's help her, like coming home. She curled up in the chair by the window, hugging her knees to her chest, and tried not to think about the last time someone had looked at her the way the king had looked at her tonight. She didn't sleep. How could she? Every creak of the floorboards outside made her tense, waiting for guards to come and take the twins for examination, waiting for someone to look too closely and see what they were. So when the soft knock came just after dawn, and she was already awake, she opened the door to find Torian standing there with a breakfast tray. Good morning, Jessa. I thought I would bring this myself. And perhaps have a word? He gestured to the sitting area in her room. Not a request. Jessa glanced back at the twins, still asleep in the other room, then nodded. Torian set the tray down and poured tea. You're nervous. I'm a kitchen servant in the royal quarters, my lord. I'd be mad not to be nervous. He smiled at that. Fair? But you should know, His Majesty is not angry with you, or your children. Quite the opposite. He's asked to see you again this morning, if you're willing. Her pulse jumped. Of course, whatever His Majesty wishes. Torian studied her over his teacup. You've worked here 2 years, Maris tells me. Yes, my lord. And before that, the northern provinces? My husband died in the border skirmishes. I came here looking for work. The lie was smooth. She told it so many times it almost felt true. I'm sorry for your loss. He set down his cup. Forgive me. I don't mean to pry. It's just, what happened last night was extraordinary. The king has been cursed for 30 days, and every healer in the kingdom has tried to wake him. Nothing worked. And then your children walk into his room, and his eyes open. Jessa's hands tightened around her own cup. They're just children, my lord. Torian stood, smoothing his robes. Well, I'll let you finish your breakfast. He paused at the door. Jessa, you and your children are safe here. Whatever you're afraid of, whoever you're afraid of, they can't reach you in this palace. Yet the kindness in his voice did not put her at ease. Thank you, my lord. When he was gone, she pressed her back against the door and forced herself to breathe. Rumi appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Mama? Who was that man? The king's advisor. I don't like him. Jessa pulled her close. Why not, Rumi? Rumi shrugged, burrowing against Jessa's side. I don't like his smell. Like the baker who used to cheat you on the weight of bread. Jackson was sitting up when Jessa was called in. The transformation from last night was startling. He had cleaned him up, dressed in fresh clothes the color of charcoal, pulled his dark hair back from his face so she could see the sharp angles of his jaw, the hollow beneath his cheekbones. 30 days of lying still had left him lean in a way that looked almost painful, but his eyes were sharp and clear, cutting through the dim light of the chamber, and they tracked her movement from the doorway with an intensity that made her want to bolt. Jessa stood near the door, hands clasped in front of her the way she'd been trained, trying to embody everything a good servant should be. Grateful, humble, forgettable. You don't have to stand by the door like you're about to run, Jackson said quietly. I'm comfortable here, Your Majesty. Sit, please. She moved to the chair near his bed and perched on the very edge, spine straight. Her pulse fluttered wildly in her throat. Thank you, he said, for last night. Whatever your children did, I don't know what they did, Your Majesty. Truly, they just... She gestured helplessly. They touched your hand. That's all I saw. Whatever they did, it worked. Yet he leaned forward slightly, and she caught the scent of him, cedar and something wilder, like wind through pine trees. It made her stomach flip. I've seen you before. Her stomach dropped. I've worked in the palace for 2 years. Perhaps in passing. No, not here. His gaze didn't waver, pinning her in place. In my dreams. Every day I was asleep. You were there. Jessa's fingers dug into the arms of the chair, knuckles going white. That's not possible, she managed. I know, but it's true. His voice was careful, watching for her reaction. A woman with dark curls, humming something I couldn't quite catch. I thought I was dying, but every day there you were, like someone had thrown me a rope in the dark. She couldn't breathe, because she'd had them too. For weeks now, maybe longer. Dreams of a man's voice calling her name in the dark. But she couldn't tell him that, couldn't give him another thread to pull. Your Majesty, I don't understand. Neither do I. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. The healers have theories. Do you know anything about fated mate bonds? Her blood went cold. She knew enough. Her mother had told her stories, bonds that couldn't be broken, souls that recognized each other across lifetimes, dangerous things for a woman on the run to even think about. I'm just a widow from the northern provinces, she said evenly. I don't know about such things. Something flickered across his face, disappointment maybe, or disbelief. The twins, he said, changing tack. They're 7 years old? Her throat went tight. Yes, it must have been hard. raising them alone. We manage. She needed to leave. One needed to get out of this room before he asked more questions she couldn't answer. Your Majesty, I should go. Let you rest. Wait. He shifted forward, and she saw him wince. Still in pain then. I'd like you to stay, in the palace, for a few days at least. That's very kind, but please. His voice was quiet but urgent. I need to understand what happened, why I woke. And I think... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think you and your children might be the key to that. Just then, the door eased open. Rumi slipped through the gap, one hand still on the door handle, the other clutching what appeared to be a honey cake wrapped in a napkin. Her amber eyes went wide with delight when she spotted the king. Mama! She exclaimed, voice bright as morning bells. The nice healer lady said I could come see the king if I promised not to touch anything. I even brought him a cake so he can get strong again. She looked up at Jackson with pure, unfiltered concern. You looked so tired and gray yesterday, but today your face has colors. That's much better. Jessa was on her feet in an instant, mortified. Rumi. But Jackson was smiling, warm, genuine, the kind of smile that transformed the sharp lines of his face. Thank you, little one. I do feel much better than gray. Rumi took one brave step closer, tilting her head as she studied him. Mama's been making her worried face all morning, the one where her eyebrows go all scrunchy. I told her you'd be okay now, because we helped you remember your way home. Do you feel like you're home again? I think I might, Jackson said softly, but his eyes had drifted back to Jessa. Thanks to you and your brother. Maris appeared behind Rumi in the doorway, looking equal parts exasperated and amused. I turned my back for 30 seconds. This one moves like a shadow with a mission. It's all right, Jackson said, still smiling. I don't mind at all. Well, I do, Maris replied briskly. You need rest, not visitors. Out, both of you. Let the man recover in peace. Jessa took Rumi's small, sticky hand, grateful for the interruption and the perfect excuse to escape. But as they reached the door, the king's voice stopped her once more. Jessa? She turned despite herself. 3 days, he said quietly, the request laced with something deeper than simple curiosity. Stay 3 days. Let me understand what happened. Let me thank you properly. She knew she couldn't. But the way he was looking at her, like she was a riddle he was desperate to solve, made the refusal die in her throat. 3 days, she heard herself answer. Then we leave. The relief that washed over his face was unmistakable. Rumi tugged gently on her hand as they stepped into the corridor. Mama? She asked. Why does the king look at you like that? Jessa's heart squeezed. Like what? Like you're the only person in the room. Rumi swung their joined hands thoughtfully. Finn says that's how people look at each other in the stories when they're about to fall in love. Are you falling in love? No, Jessa said too quickly. Absolutely not. We just met him. But you dreamed about him, and he dreamed about you. That's how it works in the stories. Jessa stopped walking. How did you know about the dreams? Rumi looked up at her with those two knowing eyes. I can feel things sometimes. When people are connected. You and the king. She touched her chest. There's something here, like a string made of light. The suppressant was wearing off. Jessa's blood went cold. Rumi, you can't tell anyone about that. About what you feel. Do you understand? I know. Rumi's voice went small. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to feel it. It was just very loud. Jessa knelt down, pulled her close. It's all right. You didn't do anything wrong, but we have to be careful. Remember? I remember. Rumi buried her face in Jessa's shoulder. But Mama? I don't think the king would hurt us, even if he knew. Jessa held her daughter and wished she could believe that. But trust was a luxury she'd learned to live without. And if Rumi could feel the connection between them, then they were running out of time. They found Finn in their quarters, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a book spread open in front of him. You left, he said to Rumi without looking up. I had to check on the king. Rumi climbed onto the bed, utterly unbothered by his accusation. He's awake and everything. And he has pretty eyes. You weren't supposed to go anywhere without telling me. Finn turned a page with more force than necessary. What if something happened? Nothing happened. Mama was there. Finn's expression suggested he had opinions about that, but was choosing not to share them. He dropped his gaze back to the book with the dignity of someone who had been wronged and intended to remember it. What are you reading? Jessa sat beside him. Magic. The old kind. He traced a finger along a line of text, brow furrowed in concentration, and it says here that sometimes powerful magic leaves echoes in the people it touches. Jessa's pulse quickened. Why are you reading about that? Because I want to understand what happened. He looked up at her with those serious dark eyes. When Rumi touched the king's hand, I felt something. Not in my hand. Here. He touched his chest. Like a door opened. Rumi, from the bed, said quietly, I felt it too. Jessa held them both and tried to calculate how quickly she could get them out of the palace. The servant passages she'd memorized, the gates that changed guards at dawn, the roads leading west toward territories where no one knew her face. But even as she planned, she knew it was already too late. Running now would only make them more suspicious. She needed a different plan, something smarter than flight. By nightfall, Jessa's nerves were stretched thin as wire. She put the twins to bed, singing the lullaby her mother had taught her until their breathing evened out into sleep. Then she sat in the chair by the window, staring out at the palace grounds, trying to find a way through the trap she'd walked them into. She must have dozed off at some point, because suddenly she wasn't in the chair anymore. She stood in a forest she recognized from childhood, the deep woods behind her mother's cottage, where the oldest trees grew so thick the sunlight barely penetrated. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver shafts. Jackson stood 10 paces away, watching her. He wasn't dressed in royal finery, just simple clothes, a shirt unlaced at the throat, dark trousers, barefoot on the moss-covered ground. His hair was loose around his shoulders, and those forest green eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I've been waiting for you, he said. This is a dream. She didn't move toward him. Does it feel like one? He took a step closer, and she noticed he moved differently here, fluid and predatory, more wolf than man. Why are you here? She asked softly. For answers. The same thing you want. Another step closer. She could see the pulse in his throat now, the way his hands hung loose at his sides like he was stopping himself from reaching for her. Why are we able to do this? Dream of each other? I don't know. Yes, you do. You know something. I can see it in the way you jump every time someone asks you a question. She forced herself to look at him directly. You don't know me, don't I? He moved closer still, as close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. I know you've been running. I know you're protecting your children from something, someone, and you'd burn the world down before you let anyone hurt them. Her throat went tight. That's not knowing. You're guessing. Then tell me I'm wrong. He was right in front of her now, close enough to touch. Tell me there's not a reason you flinch when people ask about your dead husband. Tell me you haven't been alone for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to let someone stand beside you. She couldn't. The truth stuck in her throat like thorns. His thumb brushed her cheek, and the contact sent lightning down her spine. She knew she should step back, but his touch was the first gentle thing she'd felt in years, and God's help her, she wanted more of it. This isn't real, she said, but she didn't pull away. Feels real to me. His other hand came up to cup her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones. If I tell you the truth, she whispered, you'll try to help. And people who try to help me end up dead. Let me worry about that. You barely know me. I know enough. His hands slid into her hair, tilting her face up. I know you hum when you're nervous and you check every door twice, and you haven't let yourself want anything for yourself in years. How? Because I've been watching you in my dreams since the curse took me. Learning you. Memorizing you. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. And now that I'm awake, I want more. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was heat and hunger and weeks of dreaming colliding into one desperate point of contact. His mouth moved over hers like he was trying to memorize her by taste, and she responded with an abandon she'd never allowed herself in real life. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he made a sound low in his throat that sent liquid fire through her veins. This was dangerous, reckless, everything she'd taught herself not to do. She kissed him harder. His hands were everywhere, her hair, her waist, her hips, pulling her flush against him until there was no space between them. She could feel him pressed against her, could feel the shudder that ran through him when she bit his lower lip. Jessa. She pulled back just enough to breathe, and reality crashed back in. This isn't real. When I wake up, you'll still feel this. His thumb traced her swollen lips, and you'll know I feel you too. The dream was already starting to fray at the edges, pulling her back toward waking. Wait! She grabbed his shirt. I need to tell you. The dream dissolved. She woke gasping, heart racing, body aching with want. The chair was cold beneath her, the window showing the first gray light of dawn. Rumi's voice came from the doorway. You were dreaming loud again, Mama. Jessa turned to find her daughter watching her with those amber eyes that saw too much. I'm sorry, Rumi. Did I wake you? No. I was already awake. Rumi padded across the room and climbed into Jessa's lap. I dreamed about the king, too. Every instinct went on high alert. What did you dream? He was a wolf. A big one, with green eyes. Rumi yawned and settled against Jessa's chest. And he was looking for you. Jessa held her daughter and stared at the lightning sky, trying to ignore the way her lips still tingled, and the way her body still hummed with the memory of a dream that had felt far too real. She was summoned again the next morning, not to Jackson's chambers this time, but to a smaller sitting room in the private wing. When she arrived, she found not just the king, but his brother as well. Kyle was younger than Jackson by a few years, with the same dark hair, but warmer brown eyes, and an easy smile that made him look like he'd never had a serious thought in his life. Jessa, he stood as she entered, gesturing to a chair. Please sit. I've been dying to meet the woman whose children accomplished what an entire kingdom of healers could not. I'm nobody special, my lord. Well, that's clearly untrue. Kyle grinned. Jackson's been talking about you non-stop. It's Jessa this, and the twins that. I was starting to feel jealous. Jackson shot his brother a look that could have melted steel. I said I wanted to understand what happened. Right. Understand. Is that what we're calling it? Kyle turned to Jessa with a conspiratorial expression. He's terrible at this, by the way. Feelings. Talking about them. You'll need patience. Jessa's face heated because Jackson was looking at her now with an expression that suggested he remembered exactly what had happened in the forest dream last night. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth before flicking back up, and the heat in his eyes made her breath catch. Kyle, Jackson said, voice rougher than it should be. Could you give us a moment? His brother raised an eyebrow, clearly catching the tension crackling between them. Of course. Jessa, it was lovely to meet you. I'm sure we'll speak again soon. The door closed. That silence settled heavy and charged. Jackson stood slowly, and Jessa watched him move across the room toward her with that same fluid grace from the dream. Her pulse kicked up erratically. You felt it, he said. She knew exactly what he meant. The dream, the kiss, the way her body still remembered the weight of his hands, the taste of his mouth. He stopped just out of reach, close enough that the pull between them was almost painful. You're thinking about it right now. She forced herself to meet his eyes and immediately regretted it. Those impossibly green depths held heat and hunger and a certainty that terrified her. It was just a dream. Are you sure? He took another step closer, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Because I woke up tasting you, and I can still feel your hands in my hair, the way you bit my lip hard enough to make me see stars. Her face went hot. Your Majesty, Jackson. His voice dropped to that rough whisper from the forest. In the dream, you called me Jackson. I want to hear you say it again. She shouldn't. This was dangerous, reckless, everything she'd sworn not to do. But gods, the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and wild and entirely his, made her want to throw caution straight into the fire. Jackson, she said, and watched his pupils dilate. Better. He reached out, fingers hovering near her face without quite touching. Can I? The fact that he was asking, that this man who could command anything he wanted was asking permission, made something in her chest crack open. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His hand cupped her jaw, thumb stroking her cheek. The touch sent sparks racing down her spine, similar to the dream, but somehow even more intense. She couldn't help the small sound that escaped her throat. I need to know, Jackson said quietly. The dreams we've been having. Tell me I'm not losing my mind. Tell me you feel this too. I feel it. The admission cost her, but she owed him at least that much truth. Something fierce and possessive flashed across his face. Then tell me what you're running from, Jessa. Let me help. The truth wanted to come out. After 7 years of lies and hiding, the urge to finally tell someone, to let someone else carry part of this terrible weight, was almost overwhelming. She looked past him to the window, where she could see the twins playing in the garden below, small and vulnerable and everything she had left to lose. The twins' father, she said quietly. He's not dead. I lied about that. Jackson went very still. I know. How? Because you flinch every time someone mentions him. And you look at your children like you're memorizing them in case someone takes them away. His voice was unbearably gentle. What did he do to you? The words stuck in her throat, and she'd never said them out loud, not once in 7 years. But her body still remembered the safety of his arms in the dream, and maybe, it was time to stop carrying this alone. He bonded me. Her voice came out barely a whisper. I was 17, working in my uncle's tavern in the Eastern Territories. Kieran Maxwell came through and he decided I was his. I said no. He didn't care. Jackson's hands had clenched into fists at his sides, but his voice stayed gentle. He forced the bond? It felt wrong from the first second, like broken glass under my skin, cutting me from the inside. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. I tried to run 3 times in the first year. He always found me, always brought me back, said I just needed time to accept what we were. Gods. As Jessa, I told myself it would get better, that I could learn to live with it. Then I got pregnant. She looked at him, needing him to understand. When the twins were born during the crimson eclipse, I saw what they were, but I also saw the way Kieran looked at them. Not like a father, like someone who'd just found a source of power he could drain. She could see the fury in every line of Jackson's body. What did he want to do? Use them. Crimson eclipse children are born maybe once every 30 or 40 years when the stars align just right. Her voice cracked. Kieran wanted to harvest their power, drain it from them and use it to fuel his own spells, make himself stronger. He didn't care if it killed them. He said they'd regenerate, that children's magic always came back. He's wrong. Jackson's voice was flat. Yet that kind of draining would kill them, or leave them hollowed out, empty. I know. My mother knew too. She's the one who helped me run, gave me the suppressant tonic to hide their powers, showed me how to disappear. Jessa's throat tightened. She died a week after we left. They said it was an accident, but he killed her. I can't prove it. But yes, I think so. She finally met his eyes. So that's what I'm running from. A forced bond to a man who sees our children as tools, who's been hunting us for 7 years, who will never stop until he has what he wants. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything she'd just revealed. She waited for him to step back, to realize the danger she'd brought to his doorstep, to call guards and have her escorted out before she could bring more trouble to his kingdom. Instead, Jackson reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Forced bonds can be broken. There are laws. They protect against exactly this. Laws don't matter to men like Kieran. They will when I enforce them. His voice carried absolute conviction. Jessa, I won't let him take you. Or the twins. I swear it. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But she'd spent 7 years learning that belief was dangerous. Why would you risk everything for someone you just met? Because I was dying, Jessa. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and the intimacy of it stole her breath. The curse was pulling me down into nothing, and I couldn't fight it. But every day, I felt you. Felt the twins, like a tether, pulling me back. You saved my life before you ever knew my name. Let me return the favor. The bond between them pulled tight, and warm and golden and utterly different from the horror of Kieran's forced mark. This felt right. This felt like breathing after being underwater. I'm terrified, she whispered. So am I. His thumb traced the curve of her lower lip, and she saw his eyes darken at the contact. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. He was so close now that their lips were almost touching, separated by nothing but breath and wanting. Stay, Jessa. Let me protect you. Let me... The door opened. They sprang apart, or tried to. Jackson's hands were still framing her face, her fingers still twisted in his shirt, and the attempt to create distance only succeeded in making it obvious exactly what they'd been about to do. Torian stood in the doorway, face carefully neutral in a way that suggested he'd seen everything. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. Jackson's jaw was tight, his breathing uneven. This better be important. I'm afraid it is. Torian's gaze flicked to Jessa, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. We have a situation at the gates. A delegation has arrived from the Eastern Territories. They're demanding entry. Jessa's heart stopped. No, not yet. Not now. She needed more time. Who? Jackson's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. A man named Kieran Maxwell. Torian paused. He says you have his bonded mate, and he's come to bring her home. The world tilted. Jessa felt Jackson's hand tighten on hers, the only thing keeping her upright. How did he find us? Her voice came out barely a whisper. Torian's expression was sympathetic. I don't know, but he has documentation, legal writs, and a battalion of soldiers. Jessa's legs went weak. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but nothing could have prepared her for the sick drop in her stomach, the way her vision narrowed to a single point of terror. Jessa pulled her hand from Jackson's. The bond protested, but she ignored it. Where are my children? Safe in their quarters with guards I personally assigned, Torian said. I anticipated you'd want them protected. The twins were exactly where Torian said they'd be, sitting at the small table in their quarters with a tea service that was far too fancy for children. Finn had arranged his collection of interesting rocks in a line. Rumi was teaching a guard how to braid her hair. They looked up when Jessa entered, and Rumi's smile faltered. Mama? What's wrong? Jessa knelt in front of them, pulling them both close. She could feel Torian watching from the doorway, but she didn't care. I need you both to listen very carefully. Do you remember the man I told you about? The one we've been hiding from? Finn went very still. Yes. He's here. At the palace gates. Rumi's small hands fisted in Jessa's shirt. Is he going to take us away? I won't let him. But I need you to be very brave. Can you do that for me? They both nodded, eyes wide with fear they were too young to have to feel. Good. Now remember, no magic. Not even a little. No matter what happens. Promise me. We promise, Finn said solemnly. Jessa kissed both their foreheads, breathing in the scent of them, memorizing it, just in case. When she stood, Torian was still in the doorway. The king has called an emergency council. He wants you there. Why? Because you're at the center of this. And Jackson... He paused. Jackson wants to fight for you, but he needs to understand what he's fighting against. 10 minutes later, Jessa stood in a small council chamber with Jackson, Kale, Maris, and Torian. No grand assembly, no court. Just the people Jackson trusted most. Kieran's invoking the retrieval law, Torian said without preamble. If a bonded mate flees, the other mate has legal right to reclaim them. The bond was forced, Jackson said flatly. Can you prove it? Torian's voice was gentle but firm. Witnesses? Documentation? I ran too fast to collect evidence, Jessa said. Her voice sounded hollow in her own ears. I have nothing. Then legally, his claim stands. Torian spread his hands. I'm sorry, Jessa, but without proof of coercion, the law is clear. You're his bonded mate. The twins are his children by blood. He has the right to take you home. The word home made her stomach turn. Kyle was pacing, agitated. There has to be something, some loophole. There is one option, Torian said slowly, but it's unprecedented. Jackson's eyes sharpened. What option? Fated mate law. It's old, rarely invoked because fated bonds are so rare. But the legal precedent is absolute. A fated bond supersedes all other bonds, forced or chosen. Torian looked between Jackson and Jessa. If you two truly are fated mates, and if you complete a formal bonding ceremony before the court, Kieran's claim would be voided, immediately, permanently. The room went silent. That's a hell of an assumption, Kyle said quietly. Fated bonds are obvious when they manifest, Maris interrupted. She was studying Jessa and Jackson with clinical intensity. I've suspected since the moment he woke. The way the twins were able to reach him through the curse, the pull between them. She looked at Jackson. You feel it, don't you? That's why you're willing to go to war over a woman you've known 3 days. Jackson didn't look away from Jessa. Yes. And you? Maris turned to Jessa. Do you feel it? Jessa thought about the dreams, the golden thread in her chest that pulled tighter every time Jackson was near. Yes, she whispered. Then it's settled, Torian said. We perform the ceremony. Tonight. Before Kieran can make his case to the full court. Wait. Jessa's heart was racing. What if it doesn't work? What if we're wrong? Jackson crossed to her, took both her hands. This is your choice. I won't force you into another bond. If you want to fight Kieran in court, try to find proof. There is no proof. She looked up at him. My mother's dead. My uncle sold me to Kieran in the first place. He won't testify against him. Everyone who witnessed what he did to me either works for him or is too afraid to speak. Then let me offer you another choice. His thumbs stroked over her knuckles. Bond with me. Let the fated bond manifest. If it's real, and I believe it is, Kieran loses all legal claim. You'll be free of him. Permanently. And if the bond doesn't manifest? His jaw tightened. Then I'll find another way to protect you. I'll go to war if I have to. You'd start a war over this? Yes. She searched his face, looking for doubt, for second thoughts, but found none. If this man, this powerful Alpha King, was willing to risk his kingdom, his reputation, everything for her. If we do this, she said slowly, and the bond is real, I'll be bound to you, permanently. Fated bonds can't be broken. I know. You'll be stuck with me. A woman with 2 children and more baggage than an entire caravan. Jackson's expression softened. He reached out and took both her hands in his. Jessa, your children aren't baggage. They're the reason I'm standing here breathing right now. They're brave and kind and clever. They pulled me back from the dark when no one else could. He lifted one of her hands to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm not afraid of your children. I'm honored they chose me to wake. And I'm not afraid of the life you've built protecting them. And I want all of it. The worry lines you get when you think no one's watching, the way you sing to them when you think the walls are thick enough, the fierce love that made you run across half the kingdom to keep them safe. I want you, Jessa. All of you. The golden thread between them pulled tighter, warm and insistent, humming like a living thing in her chest. It felt nothing like the jagged, painful mark Kieran had forced on her years ago. This felt like coming home after years lost in the storm. I'm afraid of one thing only, he murmured, his breath brushing her lips. Losing you before I've even had the chance to show you what it feels like to be loved the way you deserve. To be chosen every single day. Tears stung the backs of her eyes. For 7 years she had carried everything alone, every fear, every midnight terror, every hard choice. Yet no one had ever looked at her children and seen anything but complications. Okay, she whispered, the word trembling but certain. Let's do it. The ceremony was arranged with startling speed. Torian sent word to Kieran that the court would convene at sunset to hear his formal petition, and that in the interest of diplomacy, there would be a brief hearing. Kieran accepted. Jessa was dressed by silent palace women who wouldn't meet her eyes. The gown was deep green, beautiful, but all she could think about was that Kieran was here, in the palace, breathing the same air as her children. The bond between them had been quiet for years, muted by distance and her desperate wish for it not to exist. But now, as she walked toward the great hall, it woke up. The broken glass feeling dragged across her insides, sharp and vicious. She could feel him, close, too close. Her hands started shaking and she pressed them flat against her stomach, trying to breathe through the nausea. The great hall doors opened, and there he was. Kieran stood near the raised platform, dressed in formal regalia, surrounded by his officers. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, powerful, handsome, in that cold, perfect way, like a statue carved from ice. When his eyes found her, something possessive and hungry flared in them. The forced bond yanked tight. She felt it in her chest, in her throat, a choking pressure that made her want to run, made her want to grab her children and flee into the night like she'd done 7 years ago. But then she saw Jackson. He stood at the center of the platform in black and silver, dark hair unbound, and the moment their eyes met, the other pull sang through her. She forced herself to walk forward. Every step toward the platform was a step closer to Kieran, and the forced bond grew stronger. By the time she climbed the steps, she could barely breathe past it. Jackson's eyes darkened with concern. "Jessa," he started. "I'm okay," she lied. Kieran's voice cut across the hall, smooth as poisoned honey. "Jessa, it's been too long, love." She didn't look at him. The truth seer, a woman in ceremonial robes Jessa didn't recognize, stepped forward. "We are gathered for a preliminary hearing to establish—" "What is this?" Kieran's voice sharpened. He was looking at the setup now, the raised platform, the candles, the silver cord in the truth seer's hands. "This looks like a bonding ceremony, a formality," Torian said smoothly from the side. "You're trying to bond her to him." Kieran's voice went cold and dangerous. "You're trying to void my claim with some fabricated, fated bond nonsense." The court erupted in murmurs. Kieran's officers moved forward, hands on weapons. "Alpha Maxwell," the truth seer said, voice carrying over the noise. "If you believe this is a fated bond, then you have nothing to fear. Fated bonds cannot be fabricated. They either manifest or they don't. If His Majesty and Lady Jessa are not fated mates, the ceremony will fail and your claim will stand unchallenged." Kieran's jaw worked. He was trapped by the logic and he knew it. If he objected too strongly, he'd look like he was afraid of the truth. "Fine," he said finally. "Let's see this farce play out. I look forward to watching it fail." But his hand had moved to his belt, where Jessa knew he kept a blade, and his eyes promised violence. The truth seer raised her hands for silence. "We are gathered to witness a bonding ceremony between Jackson, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, and Jessa of the Northern Provinces." Her voice carried through the hall. "Do you both enter this freely?" "I do," Jackson said, eyes never leaving Jessa's face. Jessa's throat was tight. She could feel Kieran's fury radiating across the platform, could feel the forced bond thrashing like a living thing inside her, fighting against what she was about to do. "I do." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Jackson took her hands, and the moment their skin touched, the golden warmth flared, enough to remind her why she was doing this. He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the hall, but his words were for her alone. "My strength is yours, Jessa. Not to cage you, but to shelter you. My protection is yours. Not to own you, but to free you." Jessa's vision blurred. The forced bond was screaming now, trying to choke her, trying to drag her back toward Kieran. She forced herself to speak, though her voice shook. I've spent 7 years afraid to trust anyone, afraid to want anything for myself, afraid to believe in safety or kindness or, her voice cracked, or love. Kieran made a sound of disgust from the edge of the platform. She ignored him. But you've shown me that not all bonds are prisons, that some people fight for you instead of against you, that some people see my children as blessings instead of tools. Tears slipped down her cheeks. My trust is yours. My heart is yours. Yet the truth seer wrapped the silver cord around their joined hands, binding them tight. She made quick, efficient cuts on their palms. If this bond is fated, let it manifest now. Kieran moved forward. This is a... Golden light erupted from their joined hands like a star being born, like the sun breaking over the horizon, so bright the entire hall gasped. Jessa felt the fated bond snap into place, not gentle, not slow, but with the force of something that had been waiting years to happen. A puzzle piece sliding home, a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. And then, like a miracle, like an answer to 7 years of desperate prayers. Kieran's forced bond shattered. It broke apart like chains snapping under too much pressure, and the relief was so intense Jessa's legs gave out. Jackson caught her, pulled her against his chest. I've got you, Jackson murmured against her hair. You're free. When Jessa finally opened her eyes, she saw the entire court staring. Some looked awed, some looked terrified, and Kieran's face was a mask of absolute fury. The bond is fated and sealed, the truth seer declared, voice ringing through the hall. She turned to Kieran. Your claim is void, Alpha Maxwell. By ancient law, a fated bond supersedes all others. She is no longer yours. For a long moment, Kieran just stared at them. Jessa could see him processing, calculating, looking for an angle. Then he smiled, and it was the exact smile from her nightmares. Clever, he said softly. Very, very clever. Put on a pretty light show, call it a fated bond, and suddenly all your legal problems disappear. It's not a show, Maris said firmly. I've been a healer for 40 years. I know a fated bond when I see one. Do you? Kieran's voice was venomous now. Or do you know powerful magic when you see it? Because those twins of mine, they're Crimson Eclipse born. Their magic could fake anything if properly directed. Murmurs rippled through the court. The children had nothing to do with this, Jackson said, voice dangerous. Are you sure about that? Kieran took a step closer to the platform. I arrived to reclaim what's mine, and suddenly you discover your fated mates? Suddenly there's a bond strong enough to void my legal claim? He looked at Jessa. You've gotten smarter since you ran, love. I'll give you that. Did you really think I'd give up now because of a pretty ceremony and some golden light? Jackson's hand tightened on hers. They're under my protection. Your protection means nothing if I have legal claim. Kieran's smile widened, showing teeth. And I do. Blood law is absolute. Those children are mine. The fated bond supersedes. Torian started. Are you sure about that? Kieran cut him off. Something passed between Kieran and Torian then, a look so quick Jessa almost missed it, but it made her skin prickle with unease. I'm going to present evidence that you used magical coercion and political pressure to steal another Alpha's mate, and I have 200 soldiers camped outside your gates who would be very interested to hear that their king is the kind of man who steals children from their rightful father. The hall erupted into chaos, nobles shouting, guards moving forward, the court splitting down invisible lines of loyalty and fear. Get out, Jackson said, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade, cold and absolute and utterly deadly. Get out of my palace before I have you dragged out. Gladly. Kieran inclined his head in a mockery of respect. But I'll be back tomorrow. And when I return, I'll be taking my children with me, one way or another. His eyes found Jessa one last time. This isn't over, love. It's barely begun. The council chamber felt smaller than it should, the walls pressing in despite the high ceilings. Jessa sat in a chair near the cold fireplace with the twins plastered to her sides. Finn pressed so tightly against her left that she could feel his heart racing. Rumi tucked under her right arm with her face buried in Jessa's dress. They were shaking, both of them. Small tremors that ran through their bodies like aftershocks. It's okay, Jessa murmured, stroking Rumi's hair, keeping her voice low and soothing even though her own heart was hammering. We're all safe. But he's coming back, Rumi whispered against her side. I can feel it, like a storm coming. I can smell him nearby, Finn said quietly, his voice small and scared in a way that made Jessa's chest ache. Across the room, Jackson was pacing like a caged animal, all controlled violence and frustration, while talking to Kael, Maris, and Torian. Their voices rose and fell in urgent discussion, but Jessa barely heard them. All her focus was on the twins, being the steady thing they could hold on to while the world threatened to tear itself apart around them. He has a point about the timing, Kael was saying. It looks too convenient. Mama? Finn's voice was so quiet Jessa almost didn't hear it. She looked down to find him staring at his lap, at the book he'd been clutching since they arrived. I think maybe I know how to help. Is it okay if I talk? Jessa's heart squeezed. She cupped his face gently. If you have an idea, we should hear it. He nodded, took a deep breath, and looked at Jackson. Your Majesty? The room went quiet. Jackson turned, his expression softening when he saw Finn's nervous face. You can call me Jackson, remember? He moved closer, crouched down so he was at eye level. What is it? I've been reading. Finn held up his book like it was evidence, about laws and stuff. And there's this part about parents. If a parent is dangerous, if they want to hurt their kids, they can lose the right to have them. That's true, Jackson said gently. But we'd need proof. But important people write things down, right? Finn's words came faster now, gaining confidence. Mama told me that once. Like receipts when you buy things, so you can remember. So maybe we can get proof. Silence fell over the room. Then Torian leaned forward, looking at Finn with something like respect. The boy makes a good point. If Maxwell has been orchestrating a 7-year search involving magical exploitation, there would be correspondence, financial records, contracts. But we'd need access to his private documents, Maris said. He's camped on our territory, Kael said slowly, a smile starting to spread across his face. Which means we have legal grounds to search it, Jackson finished, his eyes lit with something dangerous and hopeful. He looked at Finn. That was very smart thinking, Finn. Thank you. Finn ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed. Mama says I read too much, but sometimes reading helps. Reading always helps, Jackson said firmly. Then he stood, already moving into planning mode. The plan came together with the kind of speed that suggested everyone knew they were running out of time. Kieran would be invited to dinner, neutral ground, diplomatic courtesy, one final attempt to negotiate terms for a peaceful resolution. What Kieran didn't know was that while he sat at their table, Kael would be searching his camp for the evidence that would destroy his claim forever. What they didn't know was that Kieran had plans of his own. The great hall had been set for a formal dinner, candles burning in silver holders, the long table laden with enough food to feed an army. Jessa sat at Jackson's right hand, dressed in green silk, and tried not to look at the man sitting directly across from her. But Kieran made that impossible. He watched her the way a cat watches a mouse it's already caught, lazy and confident and utterly certain of the outcome. He'd brought 6 of his officers with him, all of them armed despite the supposed truce, all of them radiating the kind of casual violence that made the palace guards tense and watchful. Kieran leaned back in his chair, wineglass in hand. "You've done well for yourself, Jessa. From a tavern girl to a queen. Quite the climb. Or are you just trading one cage for another? At least with me, you knew what you were getting. I will always be their real father." "They're not your children," Jackson said, his voice cold enough to frost the wineglasses. "Blood says otherwise." Kieran's eyes glittered in the candlelight. "And blood law is absolute, as we all know, but I'm willing to be reasonable. Let me see them. Tonight. Let me speak with them, verify they're unharmed, and perhaps we can reach an agreement." The explosion cut him off. It came from the eastern wing, a sound like thunder breaking open the sky, loud enough to rattle the dishes on the table and send several nobles screaming. Then another explosion, this one from the north, then the south. Guards Jackson was on his feet, already moving, but Kieran's officers were faster. They'd positioned themselves perfectly throughout the hall, and now they moved with coordinated precision, drawing weapons, blocking exits. Kieran himself hadn't moved from his chair, was still sitting there with that infuriating smile. "I'm afraid we'll have to postpone dinner," he said pleasantly. "I have an appointment to keep." Jackson shifted. One moment a man, the next a massive black wolf with bright green eyes and fury written in every line of his body. He lunged across the table, scattering plates and candles, going straight for Kieran's throat. Kieran shifted too, his golden wolf meeting Jackson midair, and they crashed together in a tangle of teeth and claws. "Get the civilians out!" Kale shouted, already fighting 2 of Kieran's officers, yet his blade moving in patterns of light and steel. But Jessa was already running, not away from the chaos, toward it, toward the eastern wing where the first explosion had come from, toward where the twins were supposed to be safe in their quarters with Maris watching over them. She knew these halls, had spent 2 years scrubbing them, serving in them, being invisible in them. She knew every shortcut, every servant's passage, every secret way through the palace that nobles never saw. She ran through corridors filling with smoke, past guards rushing to respond to the attack, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The bond with Jackson pulled tight, singing with his fury and fear and absolute determination. She could feel him fighting, feel every wound Kieran landed, feel his desperation to get to the twins. But she'd get there first. She burst into the eastern wing corridor and stopped dead. The door to the twins' quarters was open. Inside, she could see Maris standing with her hands raised, magic crackling around her fingers as she tried to hold a ward in place. And on the other side of that ward, a man in blood-red robes was weaving a spell that made the air itself scream. Jessa's training, what little she had, told her to wait for help, to do anything except run straight at a man actively casting a draining spell. But she was a mother before she was anything else, and her children were on the other side of that door. So she ran. The mage saw her coming, started to turn, but Maris threw everything she had into one final surge of power that shattered his concentration. The draining spell collapsed, backlashed, and the mage staggered. Yet Jessa hit him low and hard, using momentum and desperation, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. He was stronger than her, started to push her off, his hands going for her throat. Then Maris was there with a blade, and the blood mage stopped moving. "The twins," Jessa gasped, scrambling up. "Are they inside?" Frightened but unharmed. Maris was pale, shaking. But the spell, Jessa, he got the spell partially through before I could stop him. The twins are connected to Jackson. When the spell touched them, it touched him too. If we don't... She didn't get to finish. Torian appeared in the doorway, and relief flooded through Jessa so intensely she nearly collapsed. Thank God. Torian, we need help. The mage got a draining spell partially cast and— I know, Torian said calmly. Too calmly. Maris's eyes went wide. She started to raise her hands. Jess started to shape a spell, but Torian was faster. His magic hit her like a physical blow, lifted her off her feet, and slammed her into the wall so hard, Jessa heard something crack. I'm sorry about this, Torian said, and he actually sounded regretful. You've been a loyal friend for many years, Maris, but you're in my way now. The second spell was quick and brutal and efficient. Maris slumped to the floor and didn't move again. Jessa couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was seeing. What? You should have stayed in the lower city, Jessa, Torian said, stepping over Maris's body like it was a piece of furniture. You should have kept running. But you had to come here, had to wake him up, had to ruin everything I'd spent years building. He moved toward the twins' door, toward where Finn and Rumi were trapped inside. What the curse should have killed Jackson. It was perfect, slow enough to seem natural, inevitable enough that no one would question it. But then your children interfered. You cursed him? Someone had to make the hard choices. Someone had to do what was necessary for the kingdom. His hand touched the door handle. And now someone has to clean up the mess you've made. Jessa moved. No thought, no plan, just pure animal instinct taking over. She threw herself at Torian with a fury she didn't know she possessed, her nails raking across his face hard enough to draw blood, her body slamming into his with enough force to knock him away from that door, away from her children. You will not touch them, she snarled, barely recognizing her own voice. Torian's expression shifted from surprise to cold anger. His hand came up and he hit her, as a blast of force that lifted her off her feet and slammed her into the wall so hard the world went white with pain. She heard something crack, felt warmth spreading down the back of her head. The floor rushed up to meet her, and then there was nothing but darkness pulling her down, down, down. Inside the room, Finn and Rumi huddled together on the bed where Maris had told them to stay. They'd heard the explosions, heard the shouting, heard their mother's voice, sharp with fear, and then a terrible sound, like something breaking. Mama? Rumi whispered, her hand finding Finn's. Is Mama okay? Finn didn't answer. He was staring at the door with wide, frightened eyes. It opened slowly, and Torian stepped inside. He was smiling, but it was wrong. The same wrongness Rumi had noticed that first day, the smile that didn't match his eyes. Hello, children, he said gently. Don't be afraid. I'm here to help. Where's Mama? Finn's voice came out high and scared. Your mother is resting. She had a little accident, but she'll be fine. Torian moved closer, his voice soothing, practiced. But right now, the palace is dangerous. There are bad men fighting. I need to take you somewhere safe. Rumi pressed closer to Finn. I don't want to. I want Mama. Your Mama wants you to be safe. That's what she told me. He held out his hand. Come now. We don't have much time. Finn looked at that hand, then back at the distant shape on the floor. Mama had taught them about dangerous people, had taught them about how some people lied with gentle voices. No, Finn said, pulling Rumi behind him. We're not going with you. Torian's smile disappeared. Don't make this difficult. His hand shot out, faster than Finn expected, and suddenly there were glowing bands wrapping around both of them, magic ropes that burned cold where they touched. Finn struggled, tried to pull free, but they only got tighter. Let go, Rumi screamed, thrashing. Let go, let go. Torian dragged them toward the door, and that's when they saw her. Mama, crumpled against the wall like a broken doll, blood in her dark hair, her eyes closed, not moving. Why wasn't she moving? Mama! The word tore out of both of them at once, desperate and terrified. Jessa's eyes snapped open. Everything was pain. Her head, her back, her ribs, but none of that mattered because she could hear her children screaming, could see Torian with his hands on them, bonds wrapped around their small bodies, their faces twisted with fear and tears. Ed Finn was struggling so hard against the bonds that they'd cut into his wrists, drawing blood. Rumi was crying, calling for her, and all Jessa could think was, "Not again. I won't lose them again." She tried to push herself up, but her body wouldn't obey. Everything hurt. Everything was spinning. "Stay down," Torian said without looking at her. "This is almost over." "Mama, please," Finn's voice, breaking. "Please get up." Torian yanked on the bonds, hard, and Finn cried out, a sound of real pain, sharp and scared. His wrist was bleeding where the magic had cut too deep. Rumi saw the blood, saw her brother hurt, and something in her just broke. "Don't hurt him." Her scream wasn't just sound, it was power. It was 7 years of suppressed magic, of being told to hide, of being taught to be small and quiet and invisible. It was the sight of Mama on the floor not moving. It was Finn's blood on his wrist. Rumi threw herself in front of Finn, tiny body trying to shield his bigger one, and screamed again. Not words this time, just pure protective fury. Finn grabbed her hand, and their powers exploded outward. Golden light erupted from their joined hands like a star being born. It poured out of them in a wave that made the air itself shimmer and crack, that made the walls shake, that made deception burn like acid on the tongue. Everything false in the room began to break apart. Torian's binding spells shattered first, then his shield magic, then the wards he'd laid throughout the palace, the compulsion spells he'd used on palace staff to ignore his late-night meetings, at the false loyalty he'd worn like a cloak for years, all of it unmade, all of it burned away. The curse he'd cast on Jackson, woven with such careful malice over weeks of preparation, snapped apart and burned backward through the connection to its caster like a living thing seeking vengeance. Torian's scream was inhuman. The magic was eating him from the inside out, unraveling every spell he'd ever cast, every lie he'd ever told, stripping him down to nothing but raw screaming truth. The golden light spread through the palace like wildfire given wings. In the great hall where Jackson and Kieran still fought, half of Kieran's soldiers suddenly stopped, blinking in confusion as compulsion spells shattered. They looked around, realized they'd been spelled into service, and fled. Throughout the entire palace, and every false thing Torian had built came crashing down at once. And in the eastern wing corridor, Torian collapsed. The twins' magic had burned him hollow from the inside out, left nothing but ash where lies had been, and when the golden light finally faded, he lay dead on the floor with his mouth still open in a silent scream. Finn and Rumi swayed, their hands still locked together, their eyes blazing amber but growing dimmer now, exhausted. They'd used everything they had. "Mama," Rumi whimpered, and then her legs gave out. Jessa caught her. Despite the pain, despite the blood still trickling down the back of her head, she caught her daughter before she could hit the floor. Pulled Finn close too, both of them safe in her arms, and held them while they shook with exhaustion and fear and the overwhelming aftermath of what they'd just done. Jackson's paws thundered on stone as he ran through smoke-filled corridors, following the bond that pulled him toward Jessa like a rope tied around his ribs. He could feel her fear through it, sharp and immediate, and underneath that, pain. She was hurt. Behind him, Kieran's wolf snarled and gave chase. The battle in the great hall had been brutal, both of them bleeding from dozens of wounds, but Jackson didn't care about finishing it. Not now, not when Jessa needed him. He burst into the eastern wing corridor, and the sight that met him made his wolf howl with rage. Maris, dead on the floor. Torian, burned from the inside out, his body still smoking. And Jessa, gods, Jessa, sitting against the wall with blood in her hair, The twins collapsed in her arms, all three of them shaking. Jackson shifted mid-stride, stumbling as human legs replaced wolf limbs and dropped to his knees beside them. Kieran crashed through the doorway behind him, still ready to fight. But he stopped when he saw the scene. Saw Torian dead. Saw the aftermath of whatever magic had been unleashed here. His blue wolf eyes went wide, then narrow, calculating even now. And then they fixed on the twins. Finn and Rumi weren't moving anymore. They lay in Jessa's arms, skin pale as parchment, their breathing shallow and too fast. Their eyes, usually so bright and alive, were dull, unfocused, like someone had reached inside them and hollowed them out. The draining spell had touched them after all, and then they'd poured every ounce of magic they had into stopping Torian, and now there was nothing left. Just empty children who'd given everything to save their mother. No, Jackson breathed, reaching for Finn's wrist to check his pulse. No, please. Kieran lunged. Not for Jackson, not even for Jessa. Straight for the twins, jaws open, ready to grab them and run because he'd lost everything else. But by the gods, he would not lose this, would not walk away empty-handed. They were his. Jackson shifted and met him midair. They crashed together in a tangle of fur and teeth and desperation, rolled across the floor in a blur of black and gold. Jackson was still weak from the curse, still bleeding from a dozen wounds, but he was fighting for his family now, and that made him something more than he'd been before. Savage, relentless, absolutely unwilling to yield. Kieran went for his throat. Jackson twisted away, snapped his jaws closed on Kieran's shoulder, felt bone crack beneath his teeth. Then Kieran howled and threw him off, lunged again toward where Jessa sat protecting the twins with her body. Jackson intercepted him again, harder this time, and they tumbled through the doorway into the main corridor. Jackson fought with everything he had left in his body, but Kieran was fresh, was strong, had been planning this for so long. A brick hit Kieran's head. He yelped, turned, and Jessa was there with another chunk of debris in her shaking hands. "Get away from him," she said, and her voice was steady despite the blood. "Get away from my family." Kieran shifted to human, breathing hard, bleeding from the wounds Jackson had given him. "Your family? Your family?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Those children came from me. That makes them mine. That's what blood means. Blood doesn't make you a father." Jessa threw another brick. He dodged, but barely. Love makes you a father. Protection. Sacrifice. All the things you've never understood. Love. Kieran spat the word like poison. Love is what weak people tell themselves when they're too afraid to take what they want. I wanted you. I took you. I wanted powerful children. I made them. That's how the world works, Jessa. The strong take, and the weak. Jackson hit him from behind, drove him to the ground. Kieran shifted mid-fall, and they grappled, human now, just two men fighting with fists and fury on cold stone. Jessa saw a discarded sword. One of the guards must have dropped it, and grabbed it despite never having held one in her life. It was heavy, awkward. But when Kieran threw Jackson off and stood, when he turned toward her with that look in his eyes that meant someone was about to bleed, she swung. Yet the blade caught him across the ribs, not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to hurt, to slow him down. He staggered, looked at her with something like surprise. Jackson was there again, shifted back to Wolf, jaws closing on Kieran's arm. They went down together one final time, and this time when they rolled apart, Jackson had Kieran pinned, had his throat in his jaws. One bite away from ending this. "Yield," Jackson growled. "It's over." Kieran was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but his eyes still held that hungry, possessive gleam. "Never," he rasped. "They're mine. My children. If I can't have them, you won't have them." Jackson pressed harder, And you won't die a warrior's death either. You'll rot in a cell, year after year after year, knowing they're out there, free and happy and loved, knowing you lost. Guards were flooding the corridor now, having fought off the last of Kieran's forces. They grabbed Kieran, hauled him up, and shackled him. He looked at Jessa one last time as they dragged him away. This isn't over. Yes, it is, she said quietly, and never looked back. Jackson was already kneeling by the winds, and the look on his face made Jessa's heart crack. They're breathing, he said, but barely. We need a healer. We need... Maris is gone. Jessa's voice broke. Then we get every healer in the kingdom if we have to. He looked at her with desperate intensity. They're going to be okay. They have to be okay. Jessa gathered Finn into her arms. He was so light, had always been small for his age, but now he felt like nothing, like a bird with hollow bones. Rumi curled against her side, and not even responding when Jessa said her name. The next 3 days were the longest of Jessa's life. The palace healers worked around the clock, pouring energy back into the twins, trying to restore what the draining spell and their own defensive magic had taken. But Crimson Eclipse magic didn't work like normal magic. It came from something deeper, something tied to their very souls, and when you drained it, when you used all of it at once, it's like they're still there, one healer said gently, but the light inside them has gone out. Jessa refused to leave their bedside. Jackson brought her food she didn't eat, water she barely drank. The bond between them carried his fear, his helplessness, his desperate need to fix this. On the 3rd day, Finn's eyes finally fluttered open. Mama? His voice was barely a whisper. Jessa was there immediately, taking his small hand, tears streaming down her face. I'm here, Finn. I'm right here. Is Rumi okay? She's sleeping, but she's going to be fine. You both are. Did we do something bad? His eyes were still dull, but she could see awareness creeping back. With the magic? You did something brave. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. You saved me. You saved Jackson. You saved everyone. But the man, Torian, did we... He couldn't finish. He made his own choices, sweetheart. He chose to hurt people. You chose to protect people. That's different. Finn nodded slowly, then his eyes drifted closed again. But this time it was real sleep, not that terrible, hollow emptiness. Rumi woke an hour later with a gasp, her amber eyes flying open and immediately searching the room. Where's Finn? The panic in her voice was immediate. Right here, baby. Look. Jessa helped her turn her head. He's okay. You're both okay. Can I go be with him? Please? I need to make sure he's really okay. Jessa's heart cracked clean through. Of course, baby. She helped Rumi out of her bed. The little girl's legs were shaky, barely able to hold her weight, and supported her as they crossed the few feet to Finn's bedside. Rumi crawled in beside her brother, careful of the bandage on his wrist where the bonds had cut too deep, fitting herself against him the way they'd always slept as babies, 2 halves of a whole. It took 2 more weeks before the twins were strong enough to leave their beds. The hollow look in their eyes faded slowly, replaced by something more cautious, more aware. They'd seen what their magic could do, what it had done, and they were terrified. The trial was held in the Great Hall, rebuilt after the battle, and Kieran was brought in wearing chains of iron. Jessa attended with Jackson at her side. The evidence was overwhelming. The documents from his camp, the testimony from freed soldiers, the physical proof of what he'd planned to do. But as Jessa watched him be sentenced, life imprisonment in the deepest cells, never to see sunlight again, she felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not joy, but grief. For the girl she'd been at 17, The girl who'd thought maybe life would be simple, who'd believed in fairy tales, who hadn't known that monsters wore human faces. "You okay?" Jackson's voice, soft beside her. "I'm free," she said, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. For the first time in 10 years, I'm free. His hand found hers, laced their fingers together, and through the bond she felt his relief, his joy, his love. "Let's go home," he said. 2 months later, Jessa found Jackson in the garden watching the twins play with wolf pups. They were laughing, the first real, uninhibited laughter she'd heard from them since the battle. Finn looked up from where he was trying to teach a pup to sit, saw them together, and his expression went serious in that way it did when he was working up courage for something important. He walked over, Rumi trailing behind him. "Jackson?" Finn said quietly. Can we ask you something?" "Of course." Jackson crouched down to their level. "You said we're family now," Finn continued, his voice getting smaller. "Does that mean... we know you're the king and everything, but..." He looked at Rumi for help. Rumi took a deep breath. "Can we call you Papa?" "Yes," Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled them both close. "You can call me Papa. I'd be honored." "Even though we're scary sometimes," Rumi whispered against his shoulder. "Especially then. That's when you need a papa most." Finn's arms tightened around Jackson's neck. "Thank you for not letting him take us." "Thank you for waking me up," Jackson said. "You saved me first, remember?" Over their heads, his eyes found Jessa's, and the love she felt through the bond was so overwhelming she had to look away before she started crying in front of her children. 1 year later, on a spring morning, the palace gardens erupted with chaos. The twins' 8th birthday party was in full swing, children running everywhere, guards trying to look stern while 8-year-olds pelted them with flower petals, and an increasingly frantic Finn following his sister around with a napkin. "Rumi, you're getting honey cake everywhere. That's what honey cake is for." Rumi spun in a circle, her skirts flying, sticky hands outstretched like she was trying to share the mess with the entire world. Not on people's faces. That boy said I couldn't shift faster than him. I had to prove him wrong. The honey cake was just a bonus. Finn looked at Jessa with an expression of such long-suffering exasperation that she had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. Jackson appeared at Jessa's elbow, watching the chaos unfold. "Should we intervene?" "Absolutely not. This is character building." She leaned into him, feeling the bond between them hum warm and content. "Besides, Finn's doing fine. He's going to have gray hair by 10, like someone else I know who paces the nursery at 2 in the morning, checking that everyone's still breathing. That was one time. It was last night, Jackson." He grinned and pulled her closer. Around them, the party swirled in a riot of color and sound and life. Jessa watched Rumi finally catch up to the cake table while Finn sprinted after her and thought about how far they'd come. "Remember when they were too scared to use any magic at all?" Jackson murmured against her hair. "Remember when you were too scared to tell me you loved me? I was cursed and half dead. I had priorities." He turned her to face him, and the look in his deep green eyes made her breath catch. "I love you, Jessa. I love that you gave me these 2 tornadoes who call me Papa and keep me up at night worrying. I love that you chose me back, even when it was dangerous, even when it was hard." "I love you too," she said, throat tight. He was about to kiss her when a small voice said, "Papa." Mama's making her kissing face. That means we should leave. They looked down to find Finn standing there, looking resigned. Rumi appeared beside him, face covered in cake, grinning like she'd won a war. "We saved you some cake," she announced. "But then we ate it. Sorry." "Not sorry," Finn corrected. She's not sorry at all. Jackson laughed and scooped them both up despite their protests, spinning until they shrieked with delight. When he set them down, they immediately ran off to cause more havoc. They're going to be impossible teenagers, Jessa said. Can't wait. Jackson's hand found the small swell of her stomach, barely there yet, barely noticeable, but she told him yesterday, and he hadn't stopped touching it since. Think this one will be calmer? Not a chance. Good. And he kissed her forehead. I like chaos. Later, when the last guest had left and the twins were finally asleep, Jackson found Jessa on the balcony outside their chambers. She was watching the stars, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing nothing but one of his shirts. The sight of her made his chest ache. Hi, she said without turning around. He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, pulled her back against his chest. You disappeared. Needed a minute. Today was... She leaned into him with a sigh. Perfect. They were so happy. They were covered in cake and probably traumatized half the noble families in attendance. Like I said, perfect. He laughed against her neck, felt her shiver when his breath hit her skin. The bond between them flared warm, and carrying want and love and the easy intimacy of two people who'd learned each other's bodies and hearts in equal measure. I was thinking, he murmured, pressing a kiss just below her ear, about the first time I saw you. When my children broke into your chambers and I thought we were all going to be executed. When you stood in my chambers looking terrified but ready to fight anyway. His hands splayed across her stomach, protective and possessive. I didn't know it then, but I was already yours. She turned in his arms, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he walked them backward toward their bed. You're mine, she agreed, then gasped when he pressed her against the wall instead, his mouth finding the pulse point in her throat. I dreamed about you every day I was cursed, he said against her skin, feeling her heartbeat race under his lips. Dreamed about your laugh, your voice, the way you hummed when you thought no one was listening. His hands slid under the shirt she wore, pushing it up and off. Dreamed about this. Jackson. Her voice broke as his mouth traced lower, found the sensitive spot above her collarbone that made her arch against him. The twins are right down the hall. Then you'll have to be quiet. He carried her to the bed. Think you can do that? She pulled him down to her, her hands already working at the laces of his shirt, and smiled against his mouth. Not even a little bit. He laughed and kissed her until neither of them could think straight. I love you, he said, and meant it down to his bones. I love you too, she answered, pulling him closer. Now stop talking. Outside, the moon rose high over the palace. The gardens settled into quiet, and in the royal chambers, a king and his queen found each other again in the darkness, building something beautiful from everything they'd survived. Can you rate this from 1 to 10? If you enjoyed this, I have a full library of ad-free stories on my Patreon, including extended spicy chapters. Link is in the pinned comment. See you there.